Why'd you live with your grandparents?
Because my grandmother was 44, my mother was 15 when she decided she was gonna have a child. She was 16 when she'd had the child. My mother was like, I wanted her to have something that was her blood, that she could raise if she so wanted to. And I think my grandmother was agreeable to that, because my grandmother always said to me, your mother could have gotten an abortion. She never let me look at my mother in an unfavorable way.
What makes your grandparents your heroes?
Just because they didn't have to do it. It's the middle of the crack here, and everything changed, and children start being thrown away as if they weren't needed. I remember my sisters and a cousin who's like a sister, they got smart with my grandmother for some reason, and she drove, there's an orphanage in our community, it's a children's home, and she drove them there and said, well, get out. And they were like, what? She was like, yeah, get out. There's other places you can go. I don't have to do this. Could have rode in that RV by themselves and enjoyed Florida and the Gulf and drove it all the way over to Mississippi and Louisiana, go to casinos, and they didn't. They found time to do the casinos once every 2 or 3 months if they wanted to, but their primary focus was in making sure that three human beings, and added my other cousins, 4 others, like 7 kids on a daily, making sure that they feel poured into, that they know that they're strong, that they know that if the world turns its back on them, that they have one another. And that became their life's mission. So I don't know a better hero to have.
Your grandma's passing. One of the more remarkable stories that I've heard in terms of like how it happened, almost beautiful in a way, how you describe it. What happened?
That was the day I absolutely believed in God. I questioned God since I was a child. Just the concept of God. Like, how could there be God when I'm looking at the peril that people, humans, have faced, And my grandmother just wanted me to have a relationship with the Lord, as she would say. And I had Michael, who's now 16 years old. I think she was like 4 or 5. We were going to her nursery for a Black History celebration for her great-grandmother and her mom and dad to see her. And her mom had gotten married. And I remember my grandmother saying, well, why don't you let him just adopt her? And I said, why would I let another man adopt? I ain't no another man adopted my other 3 children. Why would I do that? Well, I mean, her mother's married now. Yeah, so I'm married too. So what do we, we're not gonna do that. And we went through an exchange for like 3-4 minutes, and it hurt my feelings. I was angry. I was like, Mama, I used to curse in front of her. And she looked at me after seeing I was very passionate about being in my daughter's life and raising my life, at the same time trying to hammer out a career. And my grandmother understood in that moment that I wanted to be her father. I was going to do whatever I needed to do to be there, that it wasn't going to be like it was the prior 9 years of my career. And she looks at me and she said something I never heard my grandmother say. Because usually if she hurt your feelings, she said, I beg your pardon. She said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. And we drove on to the place, and we got there, and I was about to drive up the hill, and the guy said, well, you can't drive up the hill. You have to park down here and walk up. And my grandmother walked daily. She'd do 1.5, 3 miles. She was very active. So she was like, oh, I'll walk. I was like, no, Mom, let me just take you up. I'll drop you off 1 minute. She was like, no, I'll walk. So I parked down. As we were walking up, we got about halfway up the hill. She stopped. She turned around. She looked at me. She looked past me. She saw something. She looked back at me and smiled. She put her arms on me and she was gone. I tried CPR, which I successfully used CPR twice and saved 2 people's life my lifetime. I was confident I could keep her going if somebody came up, and then I realized, no, she's gone. And it was just me and her. And then it was me, her, and the presence of God. And it was just me. And man, I never felt bad or like there was something that wasn't done or said, because I understood that all my life she had been kind of training me for this moment. She had told us I could die. Y'all all y'all got. You got to take care of yourself. She had told me my whole life that God exists. And her last act of being my mother was showing me that. And I have not stopped being blessed since that day. Since she joined my ancestors, there's not a day that I don't recognize that there is something favorable and good happening for me, in part because of her prayer and energy and what she put into me. So I don't take a day for granted. There are days where I'm sadder than others. There's days where I don't wake up on the right side of the bed. There's days that extra time get added, but there's not a day that I take for granted, thanks to Betty.
Your mom felt it was unfair
Yeah.
that your grandma passed in your arms and
Yeah.
not hers. Take me into that conversation and what she said.
Man, with me and Denise, we had a few different relationships. We had a relationship with, like, she was my mother, and we had a relationship like I was her brother. And that was one of those. My mother wanted her mother to be as understanding and consoling, to have a softer side like she did. But if my mother had raised me solely, it would have been so soft, I would have been ruined.
You think so?
I know so. Because we were too much like brother and sister. Mm-hmm. You know, and she wanted to make me happy to the point I could manipulate whatever I wanted. And she wanted that, but her mother wasn't going to accept the same things that she would accept from us. You know, me telling my grandmother I wanted to be a rapper was insane. You know, me telling my mother that was like, it. Literally, that's what you're gonna do. Now, she never put me in the studio or anything, but she never discouraged me. My grandmother was like, you can learn how to rap a box and get a trade. You know, my grandmother had went through the spoiling of my mother to understand that material spoiling is not going to be as effective as giving these kids experiences and at being firm. You know, I remember asking her one time, like, why don't you tell us you love us? You know, just trying to give her one of those speeches you saw on TV. And her turned around and said, what? I feed you, don't I? You eat every day, you're chubby, you're obviously loved. I didn't ask that again, because I realized that was a dumbass question, because love is an action. It's not just something you say. After we would go to bed, my grandmother would come in and tuck us in and she'd kiss us and pray over us. And she didn't know I was up sometimes, but that's how I understood, oh, you are loved. And I understood that my mother needed more of that, I think, in some capacity, that her mother could give, and she didn't understand how to make sense of it all. And I think that she didn't understand that even though her mother didn't say it in that way, her mother adored her. Her mother adored my mom. And I'm glad that my mom had to bury her mother and not the other way around. I tell people all the time, man, I was been in love with two women my entire life. I ended up sometimes just in between two women fighting over what I should be doing. But I think that that's what's it, that I never saw Betty as anything but my mother. You know, I never saw her as a grandmother. I understood, but my mom told me something, man. She said, you don't understand now that that's my mama and I'm your mama. And you're not gonna understand until I die the sacrifice I made. Whew. And I put that in my song, Motherless, because it's the truth. The day she died, I realized, oh, you know, it hurt me when my grandmother died. Oh, I cried, I'm tearing up thinking about her. But man, Denise dying helped me understand I'm separated from the vessel in which God sent me through. And I have not been right, you know, since, in a way, because I understood what Denise felt now, to be with the God vessel that brings you here. You know, I was on a plane. I accepted a FaceTime call on a plane just to be able to see her as she was going. And Lord, I wish I could just talk to her and say, I get it, because, you know, I stayed in Europe on company business for Run the Jewels, and I just wish I could have been there. You know, and I understand what she felt, and I'm empathetic. You know, if I see it right now, I'll tell her I'm sorry. I apologize.
For what?
For not understanding what was hurting you about you not being there with your mother when she died. I understand now. I get it. That's the amazing thing about parental wisdom. You know, their voices don't go anywhere. The lessons are still there.
How do you handle them not being around today?
I pay a therapist a lot of money, I cry. I think how I handle things today is I don't let the dark days consume me. I make sure that my children are told and shown they're loved. I am much more family-centered than I have been. I understand that all my grandmother and mother and grandfather have been trying to do is shape me to be the leader of a tribe. My grandfather died 20 years ago. My sister LaShonda hugged me, she rubbed me on my back, and she says, well, get it all out today because tomorrow you're the leader of this family. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea how to lead it. She said, don't worry, you'll grow into it. And over the last 20 years, that's what's happened.